Welcome to Card Central 365, powered by Gray Bar. This is STL Sports Central's coverage of Cardinals baseball. Content provided by DraftKings. The crown is yours. He's Brenden Schaeffer. I'm Stefan Caray, and I don't know how much fun this one's going to be, but we're going to dive right into it. Last night, the Cubs just embarrassed the Cardinals on national television, 11-0, a shutout victory, their third shutout victory against the Cardinals in the two series that they've played. It was utter dominance. We talked about in game one of the series, the 8 home runs, that hurt. I think to add insult to injury, this was almost worse than that first game of the series on July 4th.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, in one case, you had Miles Mikolas giving up all the fireworks, and in the other case, you have Erick Fedde not able to get out of the second inning. I think all he could afford to be a little more aggressive in the Sunday game simply because of today's off day, but I also think he and everybody else in Cardinals Nation was tired of watching Erick Fedde out on the mound, walking the world. I mean, that's the thing that really gets you. Home runs are frustrating to watch, but I mean, at least they're throwing strikes. When you're walking 4 batters in less than 2 innings like Erick Fedde did, that almost to me is more frustrating because it maybe is a symbol that you don't really trust your stuff when it's over the plate. And right now, why would Erick Fedde trust what he's doing when it is over the plate? Because they're hitting it a long way when he does throw strikes. So, yep, I don't know which one's worse. I hate that that's the conversation for today, but it sort of seems to be. And the Cardinals have an issue at this point, Stefan, when it comes to this rotation. Basically 40% of the starting 5 right now feels, at least on the surface, to be unplayable because they have been non-competitive in talking about Erick Fedde and Miles Mikolas recently.
Especially with a couple of your big offensive pieces missing, with Nolan Arenado out. Of course, when you talk about the lack of having Ivan Herrera in the lineup, you're going to need as much run support as you can get when either of those guys are on the mound. Now, let's talk about this comment here from Corey. And I made a tweet, I put it out there, and maybe it jinxed the team on Sunday about how it felt like that swing from Pozo was going to turn things around a little bit. You could track it. It was a momentum-shifting swing, and I still stand by that. There's still half of the season left of baseball to play. But for all the Cubs fans in my mentions that are going back and saying, oh, real season-altering, yeah, it is one game. But look at the other perspective of that. If he doesn't have that swing, the Cubs score again in the bottom of the 8th inning, and you potentially get swept in the series and are 8.5 back, not 6.5. So, yeah, I think that was a really big swing for St. Louis. But the reason why I said game 3 was almost more disheartening than game 1 was when they came into Chicago, their offense was completely anemic after Pittsburgh. They had a huge moment and then laid an egg right in front of the world on Sunday in a game where you knew that the bats were going to need to come out to play.
Yeah, I think that is a disappointment because the momentum didn't carry over offensively from having a good day against, albeit a bullpen game basically for the Cubs on Saturday, but you were able to come through and score. And then once again, you're shut down by a lefty. I mean, Matthew Boyd, I think, had 7 strikeouts through the first 3 innings or so, whatever that was. He ended up with 9 strikeouts over 5. The Cardinals collect just a total of 6 hits and, didn't really have any sort of answer to the Cubs scoring runs in each of the first 5 innings to cement that comfortable lead. And yeah, that's just a frustration for sure. You're looking at the state of the Cardinal lineup, and there is some attrition they're going through, but I mean, it was just a bunch of whiffs yesterday, and some of the guys that you had thought were turning the corner in a productive manner at the plate really have kind of backslid, and they're just trying to keep their head above water right now, Stefan, and they get the day off today, which I think is valuable after just getting your butts kicked like they did over the weekend, but you got to play more ball this week before the All-Star break coming up. You'll get your rest then, but it's going to be important before that point for the Cardinals to do something to get some momentum back going. And we'll obviously talk too about, whether or not we see any roster moves that could lead to some help. But it's largely, I think, whatever moves are discussed and whatever moves may get executed, it's still going to be the guys in that room that are going to have to ultimately turn it around. It's not going to be, I don't think, a wholesale rescue mission, because they have already supplemented guys from AAA. Like, we kind of know who's in the organization at this point. It's going to have to be the same guys that got you to still a 5 games above 500 record. It's going to have to be those same guys that can find their way out of the hole that they're starting to dig over the past week.
Yeah, and as it looks right now, making a big splash might not be in this team's best interests for their future. Maybe this year, maybe they feel like they can go for it all. but certainly a disheartening showing at Wrigley Field. Now, I mentioned a tweet that I put out yesterday. You put one out that I think was really telling of how a lot of people who follow the Cardinals or cover the Cardinals are feeling about this particular moment. You saw the beat writers not pulling any punches. Ollie Marmol, in his own managerial, very diplomatic way, was also answering that question in a less delicate version than we're used to seeing him answer it. They need to take a step back and figure this out because it's not beneficial to anyone at this point in time to have Erick Fedde struggling the way that he is.
Yeah, I saw the quote via Jeff Jones on Twitter, and the quote from Oliver Marmol when asked about the path forward for Fedde was, quote, "I think we have to use tomorrow's off day to take a step back and figure out what that looks like." Continuing, the reality is he has to find a solution to what's going on and make an adjustment in order to get through the lineup successfully, but continuing to go down this road doesn't seem like it's beneficial at the moment. That's like the big siren sound when the manager is putting that out there on the record, tells you that they're kind of reaching a boiling point a little bit with this situation. And like, I think it's an interesting conversation, Stefan, because a lot of people are kind of coming out of the woodwork now, and I've heard it even before this point, so it's not like revisionist history, but there are a lot of people who are saying, "Oh, I could have told you, I told you in spring they should have got rid of this guy stinks," all those things. Erick Fedde, up until 2 weeks ago, basically had a 3.5 ERA. I'm not saying that was sustainable for him. Clearly it was not. He has since just taken a total dive, but it was one of those deals where if the Cardinals were going to get away with Erick Fedde with a 3.5 to a 4 ERA and the underlying numbers not looking encouraging, but if he kept getting away with it, this was a year in which the Cardinals were going to just be okay with that because they weren't going out in the offseason and making this rotation better. They weren't going out and doing anything other than looking for ways to save money. And some people thought, well, you trade Erick Fedde, that could save you a little bit of money. But like based on his numbers historically, they thought he can be at least a serviceable number 3, number 4 type in the rotation to get us through. And up until the last couple of weeks, Erick Fedde was getting them through. Same thing for Miles Mikolas. But when you start to have starts like yesterday, where the guy just can't even get out of the second inning and he's walking the world, and you're on the brink of losing a series to the Cubs where you had the emphatic game 2 on Saturday, and then you come out and lay an egg on Sunday. All he has to go to his bullpen early to try and salvage it. It obviously did not work. But like that's where it becomes unsustainable. I understand people had their gripes with Erick Fedde before his last few starts, but I think if we're honest with ourselves, up until about the halfway point, he was getting the job done. Now it's not like he's going out there and throwing 5 innings and giving up 3 or 4 runs where you kind of look at the ERA and say, oh, that's kind of ugly. That's an ERA in the 5s. So that's an ERA of 6. I'm not saying that would be acceptable either, but there are levels to this where if a guy's going 6 innings and giving up 4 runs, yeah, his ERA might be 6, but he has given the team a chance to win because he leaves and the Cardinals are down 4-2 or 4-3, and they're going to try to find a way to win it with the bullpens. They have a percentage chance to win that game. When Erick Fedde's going an inning and a third and giving up 4 walks and 3 runs and the bullpen has to try to scramble, like that's not giving your team a chance to win. Not all of these 6 ERAs are going to be created equal, although that would be like an 18 ERA or whatever it would be. They fell off a table is my point. They were being competitive. That's not a high bar. I never said it was, but they were at least giving the Cardinals a chance. And now it feels like 40% of your rotation is suddenly not giving you a chance. And that's where it becomes more of a problem that has to be addressed, I think, immediately. Because again, they're not getting away with it anymore. And even in a year where you were saying, yeah, we're going to get away with it. We're going to basically pitch the guys who we've got in the org. We're not going to go look for supplemental help. We're going to hope it works out. And if it doesn't, maybe we're just not a playoff team this year. I think that was the attitude coming in. But since we have seen that they're an above 500 team, even with the struggles from those rotation spots. So I think they kind of owe it to not only the fans, but the rest of the players in that clubhouse to say, this element of our team, this isolated element right now is holding us back from having any hope of being able to make a charge here. We have to be willing to look at alternatives. And I hope that's where the Cardinals and John will say, look, all right, now I do kind of put the onus on Mo in the front office to say, hey, look, you maybe didn't think this was the situation you were going to be in, but here you are. And how are you going to react to it with a team that's still a handful of games above 500, still in the mix for the wild card and maybe even a long shot for the division at 6.5 games out? What do you owe to the players in that clubhouse and to the fan base to maybe change directions and pivot off of what you would expect you would have been able to do this year? Because I think they have outperformed expectations, and probably some new ones should be set as a result of that before it's too late.
Quick reminder that this show, Card Central 365, is powered by Gray Bar, your distributor for electrical and datacom needs. He's Brenden Schaeffer. I'm Stefan Caray. And back to this point, you also have a viable starting pitching option that the organization has stated is a major league pitcher that just doesn't have a spot. Now, I think that the pressure is on. What does Michael McGreevy bring to this team? He did not have a good performance yesterday, which again, It seems like as soon as he's getting his door open a little bit, there's the argument that maybe we keep him down a little bit. And this is something that I think it has been frustrating. You look at last month, how the month started for the Cardinals. They went on a 6-game losing streak. They start this month at 1-5. This is bad. This is certainly not what you want to see, especially from a team that has been sniffing 10 games above 500 a couple of times. And I'm not saying that number would get them to first in the division, but it's a very different outlook than being 5 games above or 3 games above, especially when the Cubs continue to push toward that 20 game above 500 mark and have really, let's call a spade here, been dominant over the Cardinals over the last 5 games they've played. Outside of game 2 on Saturday, the Cubs controlled the pace. And it felt like, at least me watching, it felt like this was a team that fully was aware of how to beat the Cardinals. And the Cardinals seemed like they were a little bit flustered at Wrigley Field this weekend.
Yeah, I think they were almost accepting. They were acquiescing to the strategies the Cubs are going to take against them. Saw a comment in here that I don't really disagree with, giving credit to Matthew Boyd, but also saying he didn't maybe pitch as well as the box score indicated because he missed some locations that if the Cardinals were really tuned into what they needed to be doing at the plate, they might have been able to take a little bit better advantage of that. And you mentioned Michael McGreevy, like that is the guy that everybody is clamoring for. And frankly, it's the guy that should probably start 5 days from now. And you just roll with it and see what he gives you for the rest of the way. I don't know exactly the way that you make that move. If the Cardinals don't want to do anything permanent, because look, 2 or 3 weeks ago, Eric Fetty was a name that people were wondering, hey, could the Cardinals move him in July and maybe get a little bit of value for Eric Fetty? And there's maybe a team out there that needs a little bit of help in the back end of their rotation with pitching injuries and the like. And you find a way to slide McGreevy in that way. Well, now Eric Fetty's got negative trade value. I mean, there is just no team that's going to be interested off of his last 3 outings. So, frankly, if you had to do something like a phantom IL, come up with a reason that he needs to take 15 days or 30, that way you'd still be in the organization. It's not a permanent move, and you can revisit. Maybe he'll get a rehab start or 2 at the end of a period like that and try to figure out what's going on. That could be a suggestion and not a permanent one. But I do think, again, fool me once, okay, let's see what happens. All right, fool me twice. All right, 2 touchdowns in a row, the man's given up. Sunday Night Baseball at Wrigley Field, if it doesn't get fixed there, I think you have to start to consider some things. And frankly, I think it was worse last night than either of his first 2 outings because of his inability to even escape the second inning. So at that point, is it a recent development still? Yeah, it's happened only over the course of 3 starts, but you can't start Eric Fetty again before the All-Star break, whether it's an IL or something different. I think that much is pretty certain at this point. I don't think that's even a controversial thing to say. McGreevy did give up 8 runs yesterday, but it's one of those things where I think you just have to wash it away and see what he brings at the big league level. We've seen some good starts and some bad ones from McGreevy at the MLB level, but he's not going to be able to learn without the opportunity to do more. And what's different now, in addition to the fact that they are non-tenable starts that we were seeing from guys like Eric Fetty, whereas before he'd have a bad one and then he'd have 3 good ones and it would all kind of balance out. Now it's untenable every 5 days from him. That's one. Number 2, the calendar is different. We're closer to the middle of the season. We're closer to the end of the season. And before, I don't think the Cardinals had the depth in their organization of major league ready pitchers to be able to say, let's get rid of Fetty, let's get rid of Michaelis and see what these other guys can do. Those other guys, to my eye and my opinion, are not ready. Guys like Tekoa Roby, Quinn Matthews, they're coming. I just don't think you can force them into the spot in July or August of this year. And to Mason Windu's point, the problem with acquiring starting pitching now is it's going to cost you prospects, not just money. So what do the Cardinals do? I think they look at some of these internal options, get a start on it, because if Michael McGreevy is in your rotation for a couple turns through and it doesn't really pan out the way you want, maybe you also get a look at Steven Matz flying back into that spot. We'll see. And you can do all these things, my point is, before the deadline to where maybe there's some deals out there that you're not expecting. A deal for a starting pitcher that is maybe cost controlled for more than 2025. It's not a rental. And you might be willing to make that trade of a prospect or of a major league piece from your roster because you're understanding that it's helping you for not just 2025, but beyond. Like, set yourself up if you're the Cardinals to try to make those moves. I think we have seen what we need to see right now out of a guy like Fetty, and I think we're getting closer to that point with Michaelis. The internal options not being there, though, is a challenge. And so I'm not saying it's an easy choice for the front office, but I do think resting on your laurels right now and just saying, well, maybe it'll work out without really doing much to try to facilitate that, I think would be a mistake at this point.
I agree with your point on that. And confidence is key with these young pitchers. You don't want to rush them up too early if you're the Cardinals. Now, a quick break to remind you that baseball season is officially underway, and it's time to step up to the plate with DraftKings Pick 6. Think of DraftKings Pick 6 as your fastball right down the middle. Saw a lot of those last night. It's the easiest way to play for cash and take a shot at a big win. Just select 2 or more players and choose if they'll have more or less of a stat. Pick 6 is available in most states, including California, Texas, Georgia, Missouri, and more. Cash in your baseball knowledge. New players get $50 in Pick 6 credits instantly on just a $5 entry. Download the DraftKings Pick 6 app and use code STL Sports. That's code STL Sports for new customers to play $5, get $50 in Pick 6 credits. Better payouts, bigger wins, only with Pick 6 from DraftKings. The crown is yours.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 and over. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. 1 per new customer. Bonus awarded as non-withdrawable Pick 6 credits that expire in 14 days. Limited time offer. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promo.
Welcome back to Card Central 365. Brenden, Schaeffer, Stefan, Caray talking about the Cardinals' woes. And we will have to preview the Nationals and the Braves at some point, but this conversation is too important to have. And I think a factor that we haven't discussed is the financial aspect of this whole situation within the starting rotation. You know, the fans have been fed up with Miles Michaelis for a long time. I think that's safe to say. Over the last 2.5 years, he has certainly had his struggles, but you were committed to him long-term and big dollars financially. Eric Fetty, it's a little bit more palatable. 2 years, $7.5 million from the White Sox. That trade brought him over here. And you're a lot more likely to eat the money for Fetty at this point than you are for Michaelis. But my question to you is, who do you prefer right now? If you had to choose one to take a start, who do you prefer? And it's a really interesting conversation to have, but it's one that I'm very curious on your opinion.
Yeah, and it's like I said, this is a recent development. And so you try not to make knee-jerk decisions and knee-jerk reactions. I try not to, as a sports writer, baseball fan, media personality, I try not to. John Mozeliak really has to make sure he's not making knee-jerk reactions because he's the guy running the organization. So just understanding that context, I would have told you 3 weeks ago, you know, right before the first Fetty outing where he gave up a touchdown, that I'd prefer Fetty. I think Fetty has given them more consistency over the course of the year. Today, I think I'm pretty firmly in the Michaelis camp as a guy that I'd rather see start a game if I had to choose one or the other. And the reason for that is I think we've seen before him have the outings where he gets blasted into oblivion, and then we've seen him come out on the other side of it. I'm not sure right now if it's going to be the same result for Fetty. And I understand, too, you talk about, like, at Wrigley, anything can happen, and it's almost which way the wind blows, legitimately, where, you know, Friday, the wind was blowing out. You knew it would probably be a bad matchup for Michaelis. And maybe that's one of those things that you can say, all right, different environment, get him back to Busch Stadium. You might see something different. With Fetty, though, like, it's been 3 starts in a row that have looked the same to me. And then last night was more of an ilk that, okay, he's walking guys. He's afraid to be in the zone. He doesn't trust his stuff. The pitches aren't moving the way that they need to induce the type of contact that he needs to be successful. Like, I have very little belief that Eric Fetty is magically going to turn it around the next time. I've been there in the past with Michaelis, and then lo and behold, he kind of does it. Like after the Boston outing where he gave up so many runs early in the season on Sunday Night Baseball, I thought he was maybe one start away from having that same conversation where it's like, maybe this is just all she wrote for Miles, and you DFA, you release him and bring McGreevy in. And then he settled in. He actually gave the Cardinals some really competitive outings for a big stretch of this season. Right now, I just have more of a belief that Miles might be able to figure something out and just pitch with what he's got than Fetty. I just, for whatever reason, my confidence is very low, even though, you know, prior to 3 weeks ago, Fetty had an ERA that, you know, I saw a comment in here about Sonny Gray wondering why he didn't end up on the All-Star team with better numbers than Kershaw, which, you know, Kershaw is Kershaw. I think everybody kind of sees the light at the end of the tunnel on his career, and he's a Hall of Fame pitcher, and so that might be what's baked into that for Graham's question here. But in general, like Fedde had a 3.5 ERA. That's right around where Sonny Gray has been. So to say that Eric Fedde was bad all year long wouldn't be accurate, but right now something's changed. And whatever it is, as Ollie Marmol alluded to in his comments from yesterday, trying to get a handle on that and figure that out is the best that they could try to do for him. I saw a comment that said, "Oh, Brenden, give me a break. He's not going to be able to fix it in Memphis." Yeah, probably not. But like, I don't think it costs you anything because you're paying him the remainder of that $7.5 million anyway. To go with an IL stint that's going to run through the All-Star break as well just gives him some rest, recuperation, some time. And then it also buys the Cardinals a little bit of time to say, how does McGreevy look a few times through the rotation? Like, is Michaelis still tenable? Or if Michaelis is really struggling, do you IL him after and bring Fedde back for one more go just to see before the trade deadline where you can then maybe try and pick somebody up? Like, there's a number of ways it could go. I just don't think right now Fedde is a guy you can have start a handful of days from now before the All-Star break at Busch. I just don't think there's any way you can do it. Michaelis, you're close to that point maybe, but I'm willing to suspend my disbelief a little bit with him.
The Cardinals went from a team that were the hunters. Now they have become the hunted. They were this surprising team that nobody could really game plan for, and they would come back from 5-run deficits. Now they're vulnerable, and they're missing a couple of their key pieces. Teams are going after them and being hyper aggressive, as the Cubs were. If I were a major league team, I would follow the Cubs game plan to a T every single night and give yourself a good chance of taking 2 out of 3 from the Cardinals at any given time. Now, to your point, I agree. I think the thing that Michaelis gives you in a shocking turn of events that you and I have talked about on the show is he gives you more swing and miss than Fedde has this year. Fedde has just as many walks as strikeouts, right around that same number. He's not around the plate. His stuff conjures contact, but not quite the contact that he was getting at the beginning of the year. And it was impressive that his run went as far as it did, and I hope he can turn it around. But Miles Michaelis at least can get you 4 or 5 strikeouts a game, and they might come in clutch situations.
Yeah, and that's, like you said, surprising turn of events. I think that was something that really started happening for his game midway through the year. And again, I probably for Michaelis wouldn't make the decision of he gives up 8,000 home runs at Wrigley Field when the wind's blowing out, and like, I'm going to say that's the final straw. That's probably what you expected to see, right? I don't think anybody was super surprised by the outcome of that one. If it's happening at Busch Stadium and then it's consecutive bout outings, then you say, okay, this is probably a bridge too far. I don't care if there's anybody ready in the minors. You just call up somebody else to eat it, or pick up a DFA'd pitcher from another team and give that guy a try. I think if he does that at home this week, then we're having the same conversations about Michaelis that we're currently having about Eric Fedde. But I wanted to address this point from Jay Call, who says, if you don't have the depth to get somebody, then if you don't have depth, then get some. Those problems are completely on the organization, and they shouldn't have let this happen. I think if you're coming into 2025 with an attitude that is similar to those of past years, which is we're the Cardinals, we're a proud organization, and we should be competing each and every year for a playoff spot and more, then I would agree with this commentary. But this is a problem that the Cardinals kind of admitted, maybe not as much as people wanted. They didn't get the blood that they wanted, and heads didn't roll like fans wanted. But there were some admissions by the front office and by ownership at the end of the last season where they said, we haven't been doing things 100% properly. We haven't been developing talent the way that we need to throughout our system. And here are the changes we're going to make to address that. And to their credit, they have empowered Chaim Bloom to hire people that I think are making those changes now underneath. Guys like Rob Serfolio, who then have hired his staff. And we've had an organizational hierarchy shift in the way that is put together that I think is going to reap a lot of benefits for the Cardinals down the road. We're already seeing some of that in Springfield and Memphis with some of the guys that are in those rotations. That being said, last October was sort of the moment where it was like, yes, we don't have the organizational depth. We've acknowledged the reasons for that and the missteps of the past. And even though no heads rolled because of it, they worked to begin fixing that. I think what people maybe miss is that it wasn't going to happen overnight, and that frankly, what we've seen out of the big league roster this year has probably exceeded expectations because of that lack of depth in the organization. They've gotten lucky, honestly, that guys like Fedde and Michaelis have performed capably enough to this point, that they've been able to basically go about 500 in their games. I'd have to look. I know Michaelis was 8-8. The team was 8-8 in Michaelis starts a few weeks ago, and that has changed probably to the worst side of the ledger. Although he did win one of the games that he got blown up in. So they've basically been able to tread water with the bottom 40% of their rotation, knowing that they didn't have a lot of immediate solutions to replace those guys. McGreevy was the one. And it's very easy to look back and say, well, the whole rotation's been healthy. If they had just got rid of Fetty or Michaelis for McGreevy, they'd be in a better spot right now. And people are going to say I'm caping for the organization when I say this, but I actually don't think that's 100% true, because it serves to ignore the production that those guys did give over the month of May and at points into June. But we also, I don't think the rest of the rotation, speaking to Liberatore and Sonny and Palante, I don't even think those guys are probably healthy still and as strong as they've been, if not for the Cardinals taking very much care in, hey, Matz is going to be our 6th starter, and then McGreevy is going to be in the month of June our number 6 starter, to be able to give guys an extra day to rest and recuperate and stay healthy and fresh and strong. The Cardinals have done a pretty good job of mixing those guys in, and if you had McGreevy as a part of the rotation, you would suddenly be, I think, gasping for a breath if you are the remainder of the rotation that has been consistently healthy, has been pretty strong. And I don't think that would be the case if you had basically said, let's get rid of all of our depth, because right now on April 1st, our best 5 would be Sonny Gray, Liberatore, Palante, McGreevy, and Steven Matz. I think that would have been playing with fire a little bit, or a bit. And I don't know that. I think with revisionist history and the ability to look back, hindsight, 2020 vision, right? We can say, well, they all were healthy, so the Cardinals really messed up by not getting rid of some of these non-performing veterans sooner. I would still push back on that for those reasons. I think the Cardinals have been pretty healthy because they've had the luxury of using guys like Matz and McGreevy in the roles that they've been in. We could have seen the bottom drop out of this thing a lot sooner if not for that. So I'm not saying that's an excuse to not do it differently moving forward, because now instead of a 6-month calendar ahead of you, you've got 2 months, basically 2.5 months. And so it's a lot more palatable to make those aggressive moves. But I think responding to guys in your rotation bottoming out is an appropriate way to do that in a season where the Cardinals knew they didn't have the depth. They told us as much at the beginning of October, end of September last year, and they're still working to probably rebuild that. The good news is the roster is good enough. They've won enough games, Stefan, that it's not a 3-year rebuild that has to happen here in St. Louis. It's a retool that I think can keep the Cardinals competitive now and be competitive again next year.
Yeah, and looking at this comment, I totally disagree with this philosophy. Is if you don't have depth now, you're not going to have any by trading your depth away, the depth that you do have. And I'm not saying that they need to be sellers. I'm not saying that they need to mail it in. I'm saying that you replenish through the draft. You try and become that organization where free agents wanted to go. And I don't think trading 4 players in your organization that's already pretty depleted for one guy to try and win in 2025 is the right idea. Yes, you owe it to this team. They look very good at certain points in the season. There's no guarantee you're going to win the World Series. And I don't want to feel like this in 2026. I don't want to feel like this in 2027. Might as well see the stepping stones being paved as they continue to progress as an organization, as a team. And I think that they have they've laid the groundwork for something really special. Now, we do have to discuss very briefly, as we are coming to the end of our show, the next few games. 2 teams in a state of complete flux, very much like the Cardinals are right now. Maybe a lot worse off than the Cardinals have been this year. Washington Nationals fired Mike Rizzo. They fired Davey Martinez. Very interesting choice a week before the draft to get rid of 2 of your most important guys at the front of the organization. And then the Atlanta Braves have really, really underperformed top to bottom. They've dealt with injury. They're starting to claw their way back in, but this is a big opportunity for the Cardinals against some teams that have been defeated both emotionally and on the field more often than not. What do you expect out of this series? How can the Cardinals take advantage, and how important is getting on the right track back at home?
Well, the offense is MIA. That's a point that Larry brings up that I agree with 100%. Now, part of it is, I think, attrition. Guys are worn down. Some guys are hurt. We've been looking at lineups with and without Arenado due to injury, due to him wearing down. We got a question in here that was asking, do we think Lars Nootbaar is playing at less than 100% health? He absolutely is. He's been dealing with intercostal discomfort. I think that it's something that, thank goodness, the All-Star break is coming up, because hopefully those days off are going to help him. Wilson Contreras is beat up and beaten down at times with different injuries. Like, I think that's part of it, but it's something that all teams are dealing with at this point in the calendar, so it's not an excuse, but it's the reality. And if you're asking about this upcoming homestand with the Nationals and the Braves, as much as we can sit here and talk about the pitching and how, 40% of your rotation feels completely unreliable at this point, they have got to be more consistent at the plate. We had given a lot of credit early going to Brant Brown and his philosophy and his ability to get the players to not only buy into the philosophy with their words, but like the actions were speaking louder. They were doing it consistently. They were finding their spots to put together rallies without the benefit of the long ball, because there are times to hit and there are times to slug, as Brant Brown would say. And there were times where the Cardinals, with the benefit of the slug, were winning ball games as well. The offense, if the Cardinals are going to have a good week, has to be the driving force, because I think you're going to kind of get what you're going to get from your pitching. But you're going to have to be an offense that can every day go out there and score 4 or 5 runs, find a way to, win those games when the pitching gives you something of quality, 6 innings, a couple runs, and then your bullpen can hold it. But they're also going to have to find a way to maybe make up for a game or two of pitching that's not going to be as formidable. And I think Larry is correct. We haven't spent a lot of time talking about the offense being pretty disappointing recently, but it's a fact. It's not just the starting pitching that has gone by the wayside. The offense, I think, is a bigger concern, because you can't just replace 1 or 2 guys and say, hey, we're back. You're basically going to have to dance with who brung you. And we see guys like Sajaci coming up and not really producing the way that people thought he would. He's got just a 638 OPS. Garrett Hampson is probably playing more than you'd like to play him, but there's back to that organizational depth issue. They don't have right-handed bats that they feel very good about. I'm not a huge believer that Jose Fermin is going to continue to hit like he has, but he probably should just play him, stick him out there until it goes away, because right now you just don't have a lot of guys that are firing on all cylinders offensively, and you're not going to win very many games this week without fixing that.
You do expect to get Arenado back soon. You expect to get Walker back soon. A little bit of news from the Nationals as of 10 minutes ago. They finally have named an interim manager. It's bench coach Miguel Cairo. There was a lot of conversation that he needed to take the night to think about if he was going to accept the interim managerial job. He was Davey Martinez's bench coach, and I'm sure that the dismissal of Martinez hit him very close to home. He has now accepted the job, so they do have a leader coming into St. Louis. They were saying maybe the AAA manager was going to come up and manage the Nationals. This is a team that, again, you think they're down, but they can beat you in a number of ways. You have Abrams, you have Mackenzie Gore, you have James Wood, who's one of the best players in the National League. The Cardinals need to be careful, especially in this starting series. The Cardinals swept the Nationals in D.C. Now you have a chance to take a couple of games at home. To me, 4-2 or bust. You cannot split this series. You cannot go 500. You've got to win. You've either got to sweep the Nationals and take 1 of 2 against the Braves, or you got to take 2 out of 3 against both.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, 4 out of 6, I think, needs to be the minimum if we are going to continue to have conversations about this Cardinals team being the team that we thought they were for the first 2.5 months of this season. King's Echo really wants the answer as to why Nootbaar would be playing if he's not completely healthy, and Mason Windu answered it for me. Who plays in his place is number 1. But number 2 is this matter of, you have to just understand that these are not baseball playing robots. You cannot look at the screen like you would on MLB The Show, and it says, his durability rating is at an F right now. You need to give him a rest. These are human beings that you have to talk to. You have to get an idea for how they're feeling. And as a manager, as a coaching staff, you have to try to balance those things and get the most out of them, while also knowing that this is the stretch where, it's important baseball being played before the All-Star break, and you have to try to have your best players out there. Lars Nootbaar is not the only guy that physically, I would argue, isn't at 100%. And this isn't me just saying I've got the insight on a current injury that he's dealing with. We just know based on recent past, he's been having the intercostal discomfort on and off. He's been trying to battle through. You could ask probably any player in this lineup on a daily basis, hey, are you 100% physically? And if they're taking the truth serum, they would probably say, no, I'm dealing with this, that, and the other. That's not uncommon at this point in a baseball season. So while I understand the question, I just think people lose perspective sometimes on exactly what guys might be going through that is just a regular occurrence throughout a baseball season. guys aren't 100%. That's why we talk about the All-Star break as being a nice respite in the middle of the calendar. But it is one of those deals where you've got a week to play, and these games mean something too. So you're trying to grind through and get to that point where you get and earn the rest that the Cardinals will have coming up next week.
I agree. And again, this is a team that has been fortunate to avoid the injury bug. It all sort of hit them at once in a really important stretch of games. Now, you think about their stretch upcoming. Washington, beatable team. Atlanta, certainly vulnerable. Then you have Arizona, vulnerable. And you have at Colorado. I mean, this is a stretch where you can make up for some of those losses and certainly get back into the mix if you play your cards correctly. Now, the All-Star break is going to be extra important for a lot of these guys, for guys like Burleson, for guys like Herrera, Arenado, trying to get back into Walker, trying to get back into the lineup. But you need to build up a good finish to the first half of the season before going into that All-Star break. You cannot afford to lose both series. You cannot afford really to lose one series unless you sweep one or the other. And this is a team that I think you're not even close to out of it. You're still very much in the mix with a wild card. But the way I look at it, and we talked about it, 40% of the rotation is not going to give you a great chance of winning the game. So let's say you win 3/5 of every game, or 3 out of 5 games you play. That gets you a game above 500 per week. You think the Padres are going to keep pace like that? I think they're going to do better. I think the Phillies are going to do better. I think the Giants are going to do better. And if you're looking at the wild card alone, these teams are going to win more than 3 out of 5. They just are for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I mean, that'll be close. I don't know exactly what winning percentage and win total it would put the Cardinals at. It would be close because that is still a 600 winning percentage. But I think also assuming that you're going to win every start for a non-Fedde, non-Michaelis is also a pretty big leap of logic where it's just like, hopefully that happens. But really, those are the outings that you just feel like you have a chance. You can't go into 40% of your games knowing that unless you score 6 or 8 runs, which Mark mentions, it's hard to win knowing that because you can't relax at the plate when you have a guy like Fedde or Michaelis up. Again, you could say that's an excuse, but it's also human nature to know that there's more pressure on our group today. If we don't get the job done to 120% of our usual capabilities, we're not going to win. That's a challenge when you're an offense going into a game. So, yeah, all of that being considered, I do think the Cardinals need to think long and hard on this off day. And I personally do believe there will be a move with Eric Fedde. I don't know what it's going to be. I don't know if it's a long-term, short-term, move into the bullpen type of move. I don't have the answer, but I don't think you can continue with the way that it's going. And I don't believe the Cardinals will. If you're asking my opinion, I expect a move. I expect Eric Fedde to not be making the start later this week, and I imagine it would be McGravy. That's just my speculation. That's my guess, but I think that's the way that it's going to play out. And by the way, for those that have gripes about the way things are going, can understand that for sure. But I think if you're pointing the finger at Oliver Marmol for putting Eric Fedde and Miles Michaelis into the lineup, that's who's on his team, my friends. That, just to be 100% clear, he is not the one that has the roster moves at a fingertip. I'm sure that there is input he can give, and he talks with the front office, and those things are discussed. But I just want to be clear that that's not his final say-so. So if your argument is, well, Ollie's not a good enough manager to manage, Fedde into being a good pitcher, or Michaelis, I mean, because King's Echo, those are the guys in their rotation. Is he going to start John King? Like, those are the starting pitchers on the team. It will be up to John Mozeliak in the front office to change that. My belief is they see what you see, and they will change it this week.
If there's anybody who does research on his team and knows the limitations and strengths of his players, it is Ollie Marmol. I mean, the guy goes home and he studies and he researches for hours upon hours. I mean, I've been around him enough to know that this is a human being that dedicates tireless hours to his craft. So if you're pointing the finger at him, you're pointing it at the wrong person. And I get it. He's the front-facing forward. He's the manager of the team. But just like in a game of cards, you play the cards you're dealt, and sometimes you get a good hand, sometimes you don't. And you react the way that you react the way that you have to. I think that's the only way that we can really progress. Brenden, you have any final thoughts? We've got a long show today.
It has been.
There's so much to talk to.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight Graham's comment. He pulled him after an inning and a third. Graham making the contention that he didn't really want to start him either. I mean, look, he pulled him after an inning and a third. You let the actions decide. How often have I said on this show that a team can say something, but what they do tells more? And so when it comes to them saying, yeah, we really are not giving up on Ivan Herrera as a catcher, they play the other guy more. It's like, all right, that tells you kind of where they are in the catcher hierarchy. They can say something, but what they do, they can say, Fetty is in our rotation, but when the manager says, I've seen enough after an inning and a third, that's a message, in my opinion, where you say, all right, do we need to reconsider what we are doing here? But that is not something that the field manager has the ability to do. I do think that John Mozeliak has had it pretty cush this year, because in past years, there's been a lot of criticism on Mo. A lot of it deserved it, because he asked fans for patience to what they were trying to build. And then it never really paid off. And then at the end of the last season, they said, hey, lower your expectations by 20, 30%, because we're not going out there and fixing this roster on the fly. We're going to kind of let it play out, roll the dice, and see where we land, which should help Chaim Bloom be able to figure out the bits and parts and pieces that he needs to adjust for 2026. But then that very roster that they didn't do very much with has put the Cardinals in a position to where they are currently contenders. That being said, there is a very glaring hole right now in the way the roster is performing, and now it's time for John Mozeliak to kind of be a little bit more aggressive in doing his job this week and figuring out the way to address that. I think that the ownership should also give him the ability to maneuver and make moves that are necessary with whatever the financial implications are. Like, that's part of this conversation as well. But I do think that it is owed to the organization, to the fans, and to the players that are performing. I think that it's probably time to start making some adjustments to see if you can't shake loose something a little bit more productive for this current Cardinals team.
And you have the draft in a week, so we'll see who the Cardinals select and continue to build this organization. When you've tasted the sweetness of victory in the way the Cardinals fans have after a few years of not having it very much, the sour, bitter taste of defeat is twice as bad, and that's certainly how it felt yesterday. Brenden, thank you so much for joining us. Again, you do such a great job. Thank you for all your coverage. Thank you to everyone who got involved in the conversation. Remember to like and subscribe on the YouTube page. This has been Card Central 365, powered by Gray Bar on STL Sports Central. All content provided by DraftKings. We have all the coverage for the Cardinals, the Blues, Mizzou coming up, you name it. Hopefully it's going to be a very fun week at the ballpark when the Nationals and Braves come to town. Cardinals try to get back on track. Thanks for joining us.